With a mountain of overdue bills scattered across her dining room table and barely $3,400 in her checking account, Eleanor Mitchell stood at the precipice of financial collapse, staring at the tarnished key to her late husband's workshop that she had avoided entering for 5 painful years. Desperate and running out of options, she made what everyone in her small Virginia town considered the most foolish decision possible, investing her last dollars to renovate the dilapidated workshop her husband had left behind. A structure that hadn't been maintained since before the Civil War. What she discovered hidden inside a secret compartment beneath the worn floorboards would not only rescue her from crushing debt, but would ignite a historical firestorm across the nation, bringing Smithsonian historians, academic researchers, and government officials to her doorstep within days of her earth-shattering find. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something truly special for you. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the dusty curtains of Eleanor's rented cottage, casting long shadows across the pile of final notice envelopes that had become her constant companions. The bright red past due stamps seemed to mock her from every piece of mail. She pushed a strand of silver-streaked auburn hair behind her ear and glanced at the digital clock on her microwave. 5:22 p.m. Her teenage son Alex would be finishing basketball practice soon, and Eleanor was determined not to let him see the worry that had become permanently etched into her face over these past difficult months. At 42, Eleanor never imagined her life would unravel so completely. With a master's degree in American history and a promising career as a museum curator, she had been building a stable future for herself and Alex after her husband Thomas had died unexpectedly 5 years ago from an undiagnosed heart condition. His death had left her emotionally devastated and financially vulnerable, with a mortgage they had barely been managing on 2 incomes. Then Alex had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder that required specialized treatments and medication. Their insurance covered only a fraction of the costs, labeling many of the treatments as experimental or optional. The mounting medical bills had forced Eleanor to take on additional work, cataloging private collections and writing articles for historical journals, while still struggling to provide the care Alex needed. But it was the unexpected closure of the Millfield Historical Museum that truly devastated their finances. The small institution where Eleanor worked had lost its major funding from a local foundation, resulting in the entire staff being laid off. Despite her excellent reputation in the field, Eleanor had been unable to secure another position in the increasingly competitive museum world. The severance package had barely covered 2 months of expenses, and the job market in rural Virginia was brutally limited, especially for specialized positions in historical preservation. Unable to maintain her previous income and facing Alex's ongoing medical expenses, Eleanor had fallen behind on mortgage payments, utilities, and even his medication. Their bank, a regional institution that had recently been acquired by a national corporation, had shown no mercy despite her pleas for understanding and her perfect payment history before Thomas's death. "Mom?" Alex's voice called from the hallway, his footsteps heavy as he entered their small living room. Despite the weight of his medical challenges and the daily medication regimen, Alex moved through the world with a quiet determination that never failed to inspire Eleanor. Eleanor quickly slid the overdue notices under a cookbook and arranged her face into what she hoped was a convincing smile. "Hey kiddo, how was practice today?" Alex appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, dark hair damp from a post-practice shower, with eyes so like his father's that sometimes it made Eleanor's heart ache just to look at him. Despite his health challenges, he possessed a thoughtful resilience and analytical mind that often left Eleanor in awe. "Coach says I might start in Friday's game," Alex said, dropping his backpack by the couch. "I've been researching historical preservation grants for my civics project." Did you know that some buildings with historical significance can qualify for renovation funding even if they're privately owned? The mention of historical preservation sent a strange shiver down Eleanor's spine, reminding her of Thomas's obsession with their town's local history, one of many shared passions that had brought them together initially. "That's really interesting," Eleanor replied, pushing away memories that were still painful after 5 years. "Maybe we can visit the County Historical Society sometime to research it more." As she prepared dinner from their dwindling supplies, pasta, with the last jar of sauce and a small salad from the community garden where she volunteered, Eleanor's mind raced through increasingly desperate options. Her brother James lived in Boston with his wife and worked for a tech company, but they were still paying off student loans and had just had their first child. They had already sent what they could spare. Her parents had passed away years ago, leaving her without extended family support to fall back on. She had already applied for every assistance program available, but the waiting lists were months long, and many required documentation she was struggling to gather. Dr. Weaver, Alex's specialist, had called the previous week with news that made Eleanor's situation even more urgent. "Alex is responding well to the new treatment protocol," he had said, his voice kind but concerned. "But consistency is crucial at this stage. Interrupting the medication regimen now could trigger a severe regression and potentially lead to hospitalization. The treatment cost $525 per month after insurance, and Alex needed at least another year to stabilize his condition. Without it, he would likely face chronic health issues that could limit his educational opportunities and quality of life." After Alex finished his homework and settled on the couch with a library book about the Founding Fathers, Eleanor opened her laptop at their small kitchen table. She had $3,417 left in her checking account after paying for Alex's latest prescription. Their mortgage payment of $1,580 was due in 2 weeks, and she owed another $740 for utilities that had already received disconnection warnings. She scrolled through job listings that all seemed to require qualifications she didn't quite have, offered part-time hours that wouldn't cover childcare costs, or were located in Richmond, a commute that would be impossible given Alex's school schedule and medical appointments. She was about to close the browser when she noticed an email she had been avoiding for weeks. The subject line read, "Re Thomas Mitchell Estate, Final Notice." Eleanor's finger hovered over the delete button, as it had every time her husband's attorney had attempted to contact her since his death, but something desperation perhaps, or simple curiosity made her click it open instead. "Mrs. Mitchell," the email began, "this is our final attempt to contact you regarding your husband's family property in Oak Ridge. As executor of his estate, I am obligated to inform you that property taxes are now 5 years in arrears. If no action is taken within 30 days, the county will seize the property for auction. While the land has minimal assessed value due to its remote location and the dilapidated condition of the structures, it is legally yours to claim or abandon. Please contact our office immediately to discuss your options." Attached was a recent photograph of her husband's family property, 3 acres of wooded land with a small caretaker's cottage and large workshop that had once been his grandfather's carpentry business. The cottage was clearly deteriorating, with broken windows and a partially collapsed porch, but the workshop, built of hand-hewn timber in the 1850s by Thomas's great-grandfather, still stood proud against the backdrop of mature oak trees. Eleanor had spent weekends there early in their marriage, before Thomas's historical research had consumed him entirely. She remembered the workshop's high ceilings, the smell of sawdust and old paper, and the way Thomas's eyes would light up when he showed her historical documents or artifacts he had collected from estate sales and forgotten archives. After their final argument, when she had told him he was wasting his time chasing historical theories while neglecting their present-day reality, she had vowed never to return to the property, even after his death from a heart attack while working. Late in that very workshop, she had refused to visit, asking the lawyer to handle everything. She had assumed the property would be sold, the proceeds, if any, placed in an account she would never touch. But now, staring at the photograph and her dwindling bank account, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The property was remote, nearly 30 minutes from the nearest town, but it was shelter. The land might be overgrown, but it was debt-free, aside from the back taxes. And while the cottage looked uninhabitable, the workshop had potential. Thomas had converted half of it into a research space, and the other half into a sort of apartment, where he stayed during periods of intense work. When he didn't want to make the drive home, a crazy idea began forming in Eleanor's mind. With their savings, she could potentially pay the back taxes, which the lawyer estimated at around $4,800 for such a low-value rural property. That would leave barely enough to begin basic renovations on the workshop apartment, ensuring it had running water, heat, and electricity. They could live there while she looked for work in nearby Oak Ridge or Millfield, both small towns but with lower living costs than their current location. For the rest of the evening, as she helped Alex with his history homework and prepared his medications, Eleanor found herself returning to the idea of Thomas's property. She researched Oak Ridge online, discovering it was a small former manufacturing town that had recently begun attracting artists, remote workers, and people seeking affordable rural living. The town had a decent high school, a medical clinic that could handle Alex's routine care, and was only an hour from a hospital that could manage his more specialized treatments. That night, after Alex had gone to bed, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table staring at the final notice from her mortgage lender and the email from Thomas's lawyer. It felt like the universe was offering her a choice: continue struggling in a situation that was steadily worsening, or take a massive gamble on a property tied to painful memories that could either save them or consume their last resources. She thought about Alex's resilience despite his health challenges. She thought about their modest home with its underwater mortgage and unsympathetic corporate bank. She thought about Thomas, a man who had chosen historical research over practical reality, but who had also taught her to value the truth hidden in forgotten places. By midnight, her decision was made. She would contact the lawyer in the morning. It might be reckless, but staying in their current situation guaranteed failure. At least Thomas's property offered something their current life did not: ownership, possibilities, and a connection to family history that Alex had never had the chance to experience. The next morning, Eleanor called the lawyer's office as soon as they opened, surprising the receptionist, who had apparently given up on ever hearing from Thomas Mitchell's widow. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is unexpected. Mr. Bennett has been trying to reach you for years regarding your husband's estate." "I know, and I apologize for that," Eleanor replied, swallowing her pride. "Is it possible to meet with him today? I'm interested in claiming the property before the tax auction." 2 hours later, Eleanor sat across from Richard Bennett, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office in downtown Millfield was modest but well-maintained, with bookshelves filled with legal volumes and framed maps of Virginia landmarks. "I'm pleased you've decided to claim your inheritance, Mrs. Mitchell," Bennett said, placing a folder on his desk. "Thomas was adamant that the property should go to you and Alex despite your differences." Eleanor felt a twinge of guilt. "I didn't handle things well with him. But right now, I need to know exactly what's involved in keeping the property." Bennett nodded, opening the folder. "The total amount for back taxes is $4,783.52. Once paid, the property is yours free and clear. Thomas owned it outright, one of the few financial decisions he made that I fully endorsed." "And the condition of the buildings?" Eleanor asked, thinking of Alex's autoimmune disorder and their immediate need for safe shelter. Bennett's expression grew more serious. "The cottage is not habitable in its current state: roof damage, broken windows, possible structural issues. The workshop is in better condition. Thomas maintained it meticulously and lived in the apartment section during his later years. It has basic plumbing and electricity, though both will need updating to meet current codes. What about the research space? Eleanor asked, unable to suppress her curiosity despite her practical concerns. Mostly intact. Thomas kept it organized. All his equipment, documents, and personal effects are still there. As you requested, nothing be removed after his death. Eleanor nodded, pushing away another wave of guilt. And the cost to make the workshop apartment livable? That depends on your standards and how much work you can do yourself. Basic safety updates might run $3,000 to $5,000. More extensive renovations could be $10,000 to $15,000. But there are programs through the Historical Preservation Society that might provide assistance, especially since the building dates to pre-Civil War construction. As Bennett outlined the legal process for reclaiming the property, Eleanor's mind was already racing ahead to logistics. They would need to give notice at their current rental, arrange for utilities at the property, begin planning essential renovations, and transfer Alex to Oak Ridge High School. "There's one more thing," Bennett said, reaching into a drawer. "Thomas left this for you with instructions that I should give it to you personally if you ever decided to claim the property." He handed her a small wooden box, roughly 6 inches square, made of polished walnut with intricate carvings around the edges. A small brass latch kept it closed. "He was quite insistent that only you should open it," Bennett added. Eleanor stared at the box, memories flooding back. Thomas had made similar boxes for her as anniversary gifts, each one containing a historical document or artifact he had found that connected to periods of history she had studied. This one felt heavier than those had been. "Thank you," she said, placing it in her bag without opening it. Whatever message or token her husband had left, she wasn't ready to face it in front of a stranger. By early afternoon, Eleanor had signed the necessary paperwork, paid the back taxes from her dwindling savings, and officially become the owner of her husband's property. She now had $1,366.48 remaining, enough to begin basic renovations and cover immediate needs, but little margin for error. That evening, she sat Alex down to explain the changes coming to their lives. She had prepared herself for resistance, tears, or fear of the unknown. Instead, Alex's eyes had widened with excitement. "We're going to live in Great-Grandpa's workshop? The one where Dad did all his historical research?" Eleanor blinked in surprise. "How do you know about that?" "Dad told me stories before he died," Alex explained. "He said Great-Grandpa was a craftsman who built furniture for some of Virginia's most important families, and that the workshop might contain historical secrets that everyone else had forgotten." Eleanor felt a flash of irritation that Thomas had romanticized his historical obsession, while she had worked so hard to create a stable, practical life for their son. But Alex's enthusiasm was impossible to dampen. "Can I help fix up the workshop? Can I have my own space in the research area? Can we continue Dad's historical project too?" Eleanor smiled despite her concerns. "We can definitely fix up the workshop together, and you can have a space for your school projects. But honey, your dad's historical theories were just that, theories. He spent years looking for concrete evidence that never materialized." Alex's face fell slightly, but his resilience quickly reasserted itself. "Maybe we'll find his research notes. Maybe he discovered something he never told anyone about." Rather than arguing, Eleanor redirected the conversation to practical matters: packing, school transfer, and what furniture they would bring to their new home. But as Alex chattered excitedly about their adventure, Eleanor found her thoughts drifting to the wooden box in her bag, still unopened. Later that night, after Alex had fallen asleep, Eleanor finally took out the box and sat with it at their kitchen table. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlatched it, unsure what final message her husband might have left inside. Nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet lay an ornate iron key with an unusual tooth pattern. A small leather-bound journal with Thomas's distinctive handwriting visible on the yellowed pages, and a folded piece of paper addressed simply for Eleanor when "You're ready to understand." She unfolded the note with cautious fingers. "Eleanor," it began in her husband's bold handwriting, "if you're reading this, I am gone, and you have finally come back to the place that was always meant to be ours. I know you thought my research was foolish, but some pursuits are about more than practical outcomes. Sometimes the journey itself reveals truths we never expected to find. The key opens something in the workshop that I have never shown anyone. The journal explains why. Whether you choose to continue what I started or chart your own path, know that everything I did was ultimately for you and Alex, even when I failed to show it properly. You always said I was chasing ghosts instead of building something real. Perhaps you were right, but I hope someday you'll understand that some forgotten chapters of history contain more truth than the world is ready to accept. With love and faith in your strength, Thomas." Eleanor stared at the note, emotions warring inside her: anger at Thomas's stubbornness, grief for their lost relationship, curiosity about what the key might open, and most surprisingly, a flicker of excitement that felt uncomfortably similar to what she had always criticized in him: the allure of the unknown, the possibility of discovery. She closed the box without examining the journal, not yet ready to immerse herself in her husband's thoughts. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of their move, and she needed practical focus, not distractions about forgotten history and hidden secrets. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor gave notice at their rental, arranged for utilities to be connected at the property, and began the process of transferring Alex to Oak Ridge High School. She visited the local historical preservation office and discovered she qualified for a modest renovation grant designed for pre-Civil War structures, which would provide $4,500 toward essential safety updates. Throughout the preparations, Alex's excitement never wavered. He researched the history of Oak Ridge, created elaborate drawings of how he wanted to set up his bedroom in the workshop apartment, and even started a journal about their great adventure, something his therapist had suggested might help him process the significant change. 9 days after her meeting with Bennett, Eleanor and Alex drove up the winding gravel road to Thomas Mitchell's property, their SUV packed with essential belongings, while the rest waited in a storage unit in town until the workshop apartment was ready. As they crested the final hill, the property came into view: 3 acres of oak-studded land nestled in a small clearing, with the Blue Ridge Mountains rising dramatically in the distance. The cottage looked even more dilapidated in person, its windows broken and roof partially caved in on one side. But the workshop stood solid against the landscape, its weathered cypress siding faded but intact, large double doors facing them like an entrance to a new chapter. Eleanor parked in the overgrown clearing between the buildings and turned to Alex, who was practically vibrating with excitement in the passenger seat. "Well, what do you think of your new home?" Alex unbuckled his seatbelt and pressed his face against the window. "It's like something from one of my history books. Can we go inside the workshop right now? Can we see Dad's research space? Let's take it slow, kiddo. The apartment needs checking before we can stay there. We might need to camp in the main room for a few nights until we get everything ready." They stepped out into the crisp Virginia air, the scent of oak and wild honeysuckle surrounding them. Eleanor watched Alex carefully for any signs of an allergic reaction to the rural environment, but her son seemed energized rather than constrained by the natural setting. The workshop's main doors were secured with a heavy padlock that opened with the key Bennett had given her along with the property deed. The hinges creaked as Eleanor pulled the doors wide, revealing a cavernous space divided roughly in half one side, clearly a research area with tables, bookshelves, and equipment covered in dust but neatly organized. The other converted into a rustic living space with definite potential. Alex darted inside, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. "Mom, There's a whole apartment in here. And look at all Dad's research stuff. Eleanor followed more cautiously, surveying what would become their home. The apartment section had a small kitchen area with an old but solid wood stove, a living space with basic furniture, a bathroom that would need significant updating, and a sleeping loft accessed by a sturdy ladder. The entire space was dusty and smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish, but the structure itself appeared sound. The research side was what truly captured her attention. Thomas had created an elaborate space filled with bookshelves, document tables, specialized equipment for preserving and examining historical materials, and walls covered with maps of Virginia spanning different historical periods. A large desk dominated one corner, still covered with papers weighted down with polished river stones. In another area stood what appeared to be photography equipment for documenting artifacts and documents. "Your dad was very organized," Eleanor observed, running her hand along a bookshelf where volumes had been arranged by historical period and topic, each with its outline marked on the wood so it could be returned to its proper place. "He was researching the Hampton letters," Alex said with confidence, examining a large chart pinned to one wall. "Dad said they might prove that what we know about the Constitutional Convention isn't the whole story." Eleanor approached the chart, surprised by the detail. It showed a timeline of the Constitutional Convention with markings, notations, and symbols in Thomas's handwriting. Names were connected with colored strings, and newspaper clippings, photocopied letters, and handwritten notes were pinned alongside. "The Hampton-Madison Correspondence," she read from a heading at the top of the chart. "Uncatalogued 1787 to 1789, referenced but never published." For the first time, Eleanor felt a flicker of understanding about her husband's obsession. The chart was not the work of a conspiracy theorist, but a methodical researcher who had approached his historical quest with academic rigor. As they explored further, Eleanor's practical side reasserted itself. The apartment would need work before it was truly livable, updating the plumbing, ensuring the electrical system was safe, sealing drafts around windows, and thoroughly cleaning every surface. The bathroom contained an old clawfoot tub and sink that could be salvaged, but the plumbing was outdated and the water heater ancient. "We'll need to camp in the main room for a few days while we get the apartment ready," Eleanor explained to Alex. "Think of it like an indoor camping trip." "Can we use Dad's stuff?" Alex asked, pointing to camping equipment neatly stored on shelves along one wall. "Some of it, yes. But we brought our own sleeping bags and essentials." That first night in their new home was both challenging and oddly peaceful. They set up sleeping bags in the main research area, using battery-powered lanterns for light since Eleanor wanted an electrician to check the wiring before they used the workshop's power. Despite the discomfort of sleeping on the floor, the country silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of wind through oak leaves, was a welcome change from the constant noise of their previous neighborhood. As Alex fell asleep, Eleanor found herself drawn to Thomas's desk, using her lantern to examine the papers still spread across its surface photocopies of historical correspondence, handwritten notes about Revolutionary-era figures, and sketches of what appeared to be architectural features of early government buildings. One paper contained a list of names delegates to the Constitutional Convention and their known correspondence during the summer of 1787. Besides some names were question marks and notations like verified connection or suspected intermediary. "What were you really looking for, Thomas?" she whispered to the empty workshop. Was it just historical curiosity or something more? She remembered suddenly the box Bennett had given her. She had packed it in her personal bag, but had not opened it again since that first night. Now surrounded by her husband's life's work, she felt compelled to examine its contents more thoroughly. The journal inside the box proved to be not a personal diary, but a research log, meticulously detailing Thomas's investigation into what he called the Hampton letters over more than a decade. He had tracked down descendants of Revolutionary-era families, cross-referenced historical accounts with property records, and systematically worked through archives at small historical societies across Virginia and neighboring states. According to his notes, William Hampton had been a wealthy landowner and contemporary of James Madison, who had housed several Constitutional Convention delegates on his Philadelphia property during the summer of 1787. Hampton had not been a delegate himself, but had maintained extensive correspondence with Madison and others during the convention and in the years immediately following. While Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention were considered the authoritative record of the proceedings, Thomas's research suggested that Hampton had kept his own detailed account, based on daily conversations with delegates staying at his home, conversations that sometimes contradicted the official record. What struck Eleanor most was her husband's methodical approach. This was not blind faith or historical revisionism. He had applied rigorous historical research methods, primary source verification, and careful documentation to build his case. The journal's later entries suggested he had been closing in on something significant in the months before his death. The final entry, dated just 3 weeks before his fatal heart attack, read, cross-referenced the Pendleton estate inventory with Hampton's personal accounts. The discrepancy in the library contents confirms my theory. The letters were deliberately excluded from Madison's papers after his death. The physical evidence must exist in one of 3 locations. The workshop floor seems most promising based on architectural modifications made in 1851. We'll begin careful examination tomorrow. There was no record of what he had found, if anything, but a small note in the margin added, "Need to prepare." The hidden compartment, if this is what I think it is. The implications could be explosive until properly contextualized. Eleanor closed the journal, her mind racing. Hidden compartment? What had Thomas discovered that required such secrecy? And what was the iron key for? It didn't match any of the visible locks or cabinets in the workshop. Too exhausted to investigate further, she returned to her sleeping bag beside Alex, but her dreams were filled with images of quill pens, secret correspondence, and her husband's voice calling her to finish what he had started. The next morning brought their first full day at the property and a clearer assessment of the work ahead. Some letters hinted at more contentious debates than officially recorded, and different motivations behind certain compromises in the Constitution. But even more valuable than the historical revelations might be the provenance. How had these documents remained hidden for over 2 centuries? Why had they been concealed beneath the floorboards of what was now their workshop? And most importantly, why had these particular letters been excluded from the official historical record? After carefully photographing everything in position, Eleanor began methodically documenting their find. She created a detailed inventory, noting dimensions, condition, and distinct characteristics of each item. The historical materials were difficult to value monetarily, but as potential evidence that might revise our understanding of constitutional history, they were priceless. The journal, which appeared to be written by William Hampton himself, detailed daily conversations with Madison and other delegates, including discussions that contradicted or expanded upon the known record. If authentic, it represented a second witness account of the Constitutional Convention, something historians had believed lost to history. As evening approached and Alex's excitement began to give way to fatigue, Eleanor carefully returned everything to the hidden compartment except for Hampton's journal, which she wanted to read more thoroughly. She locked the trap door, pocketed the key, and focused on getting Alex fed, medicated, and settled for the night. "But I'm not tired," Alex protested as Eleanor checked his medication schedule. "We found actual historical treasure. Can't we stay up and read more of the journal?" "Tomorrow," Eleanor promised. "We need to think carefully about what we've found and what to do next. This isn't just about us, Alex. If these documents are authentic, they're historically significant, like museum level. significant, and there are professional and ethical considerations about how to proceed. Once Alex had finally fallen asleep, Eleanor sat at the small kitchen table with Hampton's journal, a notebook of her own, and a strong cup of tea. As she carefully turned the brittle pages, a detailed picture began to emerge of what had actually happened during those crucial months in Philadelphia. According to Hampton, while the broad strokes of the Constitutional Convention as recorded by Madison were accurate, significant details had been omitted or softened. The journal documented more heated debates about executive power, deeper concerns about potential monarchy, and explicit discussions about slavery that went beyond what appeared in the official record. Most significantly, Hampton recorded private conversations with Madison where the father of the Constitution expressed reservations about certain compromises and admitted to recording a more harmonious version of events to ensure ratification and national unity. The journal ended with an entry dated October 1789. After the Constitution had been ratified and the new government established, Madison visited today and was greatly disturbed to find I had maintained this account. He insisted such unvarnished records could destabilize the fragile Union if made public during these formative years. While I respect his concern for the Republic's stability, I cannot destroy what may be the only complete record of our nation's true founding. I have therefore agreed to seal these materials and entrust them to my descendants with instructions that they remain private until such time as the nation is established enough to face its full history. Eleanor turned to Thomas's research journal for possible answers, focusing on the sections where he discussed his discovery of the Hampton materials. According to his notes, the documents had remained hidden for generations, passed down through the Hampton family until the line died out in the 1850s. The last Hampton heir had apparently entrusted the materials to Thomas's great-great-grandfather, a cabinet maker who had built the workshop where they now lived. Thomas had discovered references to the hidden documents in old family correspondence, and had spent years tracking down clues before finding the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. His notes indicated that he had been in the process of authenticating the materials and preparing a comprehensive analysis when his heart attack had cut his work short. Most intriguingly, Thomas's final entry suggested he had been struggling with the ethical implications of his discovery. These documents reveal a more contentious, more human constitutional convention than our national mythology permits, he had written. They do not undermine the brilliance of our founding documents, but they do complicate our understanding of the men who created them and the compromises they felt necessary. In our current polarized climate, how do we introduce such complexity without providing ammunition for those who would destabilize rather than strengthen our institutions? It was a profound question that Eleanor now found herself inheriting along with the physical documents. The materials could potentially rewrite sections of American history, providing a more nuanced understanding of the nation's founding. But in an era of political division and selective interpretation of history, such revelations could be weaponized by various factions if not properly contextualized. As she finally went to bed in the early hours of the morning, Eleanor's mind whirled with possibilities and concerns. The documents alone could solve their immediate financial problems if authenticated and sold to a major museum or university. But their historical significance went far beyond monetary value, potentially offering insights that could enrich public understanding of American constitutional history. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of powdered wigs, quill pens, and the echo of debates that had shaped a nation more than 2 centuries ago. Morning brought practical reality back into focus. It was Monday, a school day for Alex and a workday for Eleanor, who had secured a part-time position cataloging documents for the Oak Ridge Historical Society 3 days a week. They went through their regular routine breakfast, medications for Alex, final checks of backpack and lunch, but the excitement of their discovery hummed beneath the surface of every interaction. "Remember, we're keeping this our secret for now," Eleanor reminded Alex as she dropped him at school. "No talking about hidden documents or founding fathers, okay?" "I know, Mom," Alex replied with surprising seriousness. Dad kept it secret for a reason. After work, Eleanor drove to the County Historical Society in Millfield, where she spent 2 hours researching the Hampton family and their connections to the Constitutional Convention. What she discovered both confirmed and expanded upon Thomas's research. William Hampton had indeed been a wealthy Philadelphia landowner who had hosted several delegates during the convention. Historical records mentioned his correspondence with Madison and others, but no collection of such letters had ever been cataloged in any major archive. That evening, after Alex was asleep, Eleanor spread Hampton's journal across the kitchen table and compared it with her own knowledge of constitutional history. Using her museum curatorial training, she began the process of preliminary authentication, examining paper characteristics, handwriting consistency, watermarks, and ink composition. While proper scientific authentication would require professional equipment and expertise, her initial assessment suggested the documents were genuine 18th century materials. The handwriting matched known samples of Madison's correspondence, and the content aligned with established historical facts while adding previously unknown details. But the deeper she delved into Hampton's account, the more she understood Thomas's ethical dilemma. The journal revealed the Founding Fathers as brilliant but flawed men navigating unprecedented political territory. It documented moments of self-interest, alongside genuine patriotism, pragmatic compromises alongside principled stands. In one particularly powerful entry, Hampton described a private conversation with Madison. "Mr. Madison confessed to me tonight his fear that we are creating a system that future generations will venerate beyond reason. Men are not angels," he said, "and we who draft this Constitution are less angelic than most might believe. I worry that our necessary compromises will be mistaken for perfect wisdom, and our practical solutions elevated to sacred principles." When I suggested his notes might preserve the human complexity of our endeavor, he replied that a new nation requires founding myths, and that too much truth too soon might strangle our experiment before it has chance to breathe. After several hours of work, Eleanor felt confident that the documents were both authentic and historically significant. The question now was what to do with this information. Attempting to publish or publicly present such materials without proper authentication and academic context would be irresponsible. Formally approaching a major institution would require expertise beyond her own and might mean surrendering control of the narrative. Eleanor considered her options carefully. The responsible approach would be to contact proper authorities in the historical community, perhaps the Smithsonian or the National Archives, to discuss the documents and explore avenues for authentication and preservation. But that would mean potentially losing agency over the discovery and receiving little recognition for Thomas's years of research. Another option would be to seek private partnership with an academic historian from a respected university, someone with the credentials to help authenticate the materials and the scholarly platform to present them properly. This would mean sharing the discovery but maintaining some control over how it was presented. The simplest path would be to sell the documents to a major collector or institution, address their immediate financial needs, and leave the historical implications to others. This would provide a practical solution to their current problems, without the complications of becoming entangled in what could become a contentious historical debate. As Eleanor deliberated, she found herself thinking about what Thomas would have wanted. Despite their differences, she knew he had been driven by more than just academic achievement or recognition. He had been captivated by the historical truth, the complexity behind the simplistic narratives that often dominated public understanding of American history. He had wanted to complete this research not just to prove his theories correct, but to enrich our collective understanding of the nation's founding, to help Americans see their constitutional system not as a perfect creation, but as a human achievement, with all the complexity that implied. The next morning, Eleanor made a decision that would set their course for the coming weeks. She would conduct preliminary outreach to a select few experts who could help authenticate the documents while maintaining confidentiality. Based on their assessment, she would then decide whether to pursue formal institutional involvement, academic partnership, or another approach that balanced historical responsibility with recognition of Thomas's work. But first, she needed more information about proper procedures for handling historically significant documents. This led her to the Oak Ridge Public Library, a small but well-maintained building that served as both library and community center for the town. The librarian, Martin Chun, was a man in his early 40s with an enthusiastic manner and a deep knowledge of local history. When Eleanor mentioned she was researching proper handling of historical documents for a personal project, Martin's interest was immediately piqued. My specialty before moving to Oak Ridge was actually archival preservation, Martin explained, leading Eleanor to a section on historical research methods. I worked at the University of Virginia's Special Collections Department for 12 years. Before deciding I wanted a quieter life, what era of documents are you interested in? Eleanor felt a chill of recognition. Was it mere coincidence that a trained archivist was working at this small-town library? Or was fate placing resources in her path? After a brief hesitation, she chose cautious honesty. Late 18th century. Specifically from the constitutional period. I'm helping catalog some family papers that might have historical significance. Martin's eyes widened with professional interest. That's my academic specialty. My dissertation was on unexamined private correspondence from the constitutional era and its impact on our understanding of the founding documents. Eleanor stared at him, momentarily speechless at this unexpected alignment. Martin mistook her silence for skepticism. I know, it seems unlikely to find someone with that specific background in a town this size, he laughed. But my partner grew up here, and when the library position opened up after his father fell ill, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to make a change from academic pressure. Eleanor made a split-second decision that would profoundly impact their journey. Martin, I wonder if I might consult with you privately about something. It requires absolute discretion. Martin nodded, his expression shifting to professional seriousness. Of course. The library's closed tomorrow for renovations, but I could meet you somewhere if it's urgent. They arranged to meet the following morning at Eleanor's workshop, with Martin agreeing to bring reference materials on document authentication and preservation. As they parted outside the library, Martin hesitated, then spoke with careful consideration. Mrs. Mitchell, if you've found what I think you might have, please be extremely careful. Historical discoveries of that magnitude attract attention beyond academic circles. There are private collectors who would pay extraordinary sums for significant founding-era documents, regardless of their proper place in the public trust. The warning added a new dimension to Eleanor's concerns. Until now, she had been thinking primarily in terms of academic responsibility and financial implications. Martin's words reminded her that truly valuable historical artifacts could attract those with less scrupulous intentions. That evening, as Eleanor prepared dinner in their increasingly comfortable workshop apartment, she shared a simplified version of developments with Alex. So Mr. Chun is like a document detective? Alex asked, setting the table with careful precision. More like a document doctor. Eleanor smiled at her son's analogy. He knows how to determine if old papers are authentic and how to preserve them properly. And he's going to help us with Dad's documents? Alex persisted. The ones about the Constitution? He's going to give us advice about the proper way to handle historical materials, Eleanor clarified. We haven't decided exactly what we're doing with the documents yet. But if they're real, they'll be in museums and history books, right? Alex's eyes brightened. Dad's name will be in history books, too. Eleanor sat down beside her son, recognizing an opportunity for an important conversation. Sweetie, I want you to understand something. what we found is already valuable in many ways. It's a connection to our country's history. It's an important historical discovery, and yes, it might eventually bring recognition to your dad's research. But the most important thing about historical work isn't fame or credit. What is it then? Alex asked with the slight impatience of a child who sensed a life lesson coming. It's about truth and understanding. Eleanor chose her words carefully. Your dad spent years researching these documents, not just because he wanted to make a big discovery, but because he believed in uncovering a more complete picture of our history. He wanted people to understand that the founding of our country was a human story filled with debates, compromises, and real people trying their best during complicated times. Alex considered this, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. So it's about making history real instead of just memorizing dates and famous quotes? Exactly, Eleanor smiled, impressed by his insight. And about respecting the complexity of the past rather than turning it into simple stories that miss important details. And now we're finishing what Dad started, right? Like a family mission? A family mission, Eleanor echoed, liking the phrase. Yes, I suppose we are. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air. Eleanor prepared carefully for Martin's visit, organizing the workshop research area and reviewing Thomas's notes so she could explain his methodology coherently. She had arranged for Alex to spend the morning with a new friend from school, not yet ready to involve her son in the more technical aspects of document authentication. Martin arrived promptly at 9, his car loaded with reference books, a digital microscope that connected to his laptop, and specialized equipment for examining paper and ink characteristics. His eyes widened as he entered the workshop, taking in Thomas's elaborate research setup. Your husband was serious about his historical research, he observed, setting down his equipment. This is more comprehensive than some university archives I've worked with. Thomas was nothing if not thorough, Eleanor replied, feeling a surprising surge of pride in her late husband's dedication. His specialty was early American history, particularly the constitutional period. For the next hour, Eleanor explained Thomas's research journey, showing Martin the charts, notes, and reference materials that had led to the discovery. She deliberately held back on revealing the hidden compartment until she felt confident in Martin's trustworthiness. As Martin examined Thomas's research methodology, his professional respect became increasingly evident. This is extraordinary work, he said, studying the timeline chart. Many academic historians wouldn't be this meticulous in tracking primary source connections. Finally, Eleanor made her decision. Thomas found something shortly before his death. Something he hid for safekeeping. Martin looked up from the research notes, his expression a mixture of professional curiosity and personal excitement. What kind of something? Instead of explaining, Eleanor walked to the area of the floor where the hidden compartment lay. She knelt down, slid open the keyhole cover, and unlocked the trapdoor. I think you should see for yourself. Martin's reaction as she lifted the first documents from the hidden compartment confirmed Eleanor's decision to trust him. His hands trembled slightly as he donned the cotton gloves he had brought, and his eyes filled with the reverence that only a true historian shows when confronting authentic pieces of the past. My God, he whispered, carefully examining the first letter. This appears to be Madison's handwriting, and the paper. He held the document up to the light, examining the watermark. Consistent with late 18th century stock. For the next several hours, Martin conducted preliminary authentication tests using the equipment he had brought. He examined paper fibers with the digital microscope, photographed watermarks, analyzed ink characteristics, and compared handwriting. Samples with known examples he had in his reference materials. By early afternoon, he sat back in his chair, his expression a mixture of awe and professional excitement. Based on my preliminary examination, these appear to be genuine 18th century documents. The paper, ink, handwriting, and content all align with what we would expect from this period. The Hampton Journal, particularly the binding technique, the paper stock, even the slight variations in ink that suggest entries written over time rather than all at once, all point to authenticity. Eleanor felt a surge of validation, not just of the documents themselves, but of Thomas's years of research. What does this mean in historical terms? Are they as significant as Thomas believed? Martin's expression grew even more animated. If these are what they appear to be, and I believe they are, they represent one of the most significant constitutional-era discoveries in decades. A contemporaneous account of the convention from someone who was not a delegate, but who had private conversations with multiple framers, letters that didn't make it into the official Madison papers. This could substantially expand our understanding of the debates and compromises that shaped the Constitution. And William Hampton's claim that Madison deliberately omitted certain discussions from his official notes? Eleanor asked, referencing the journal's most controversial assertion. Historians have long suspected that Madison's notes, which were not published until after his death, were edited and refined over time, Martin explained. He was conscious of his legacy and the legacy of the convention. These materials could provide concrete evidence of specific omissions and their rationale. The scholarly validation was gratifying, but it brought Eleanor back to the central question. So what happens now? What's the responsible way to proceed with materials of this significance? Martin considered the question thoughtfully. Professionally, these documents should ultimately reside in a major public institution where they can be properly preserved and made available to researchers. The National Archives, the Smithsonian, or one of the major university special collections would be appropriate, but the process matters enormously, Martin continued. How these materials are introduced to the scholarly community and the public will shape their impact and reception. Rushing them into the public eye without proper context could lead to misinterpretation or exploitation of selective quotes for political purposes. This aligned perfectly with Thomas's concerns in his final journal entries. Eleanor felt a deepening connection to her late husband's perspective, a bridge forming across the chasm that had separated them in life. What would you recommend? She asked. A measured approach, Martin replied. First, we need more comprehensive authentication scientific testing that's beyond my equipment here. Then, assemble a small team of respected historians from different specialties to provide interdisciplinary context. Finally, prepare a proper academic introduction of the materials before they're made public. And how does one go about that? Without losing control of the process? Eleanor asked, thinking of the financial realities they still faced and the recognition Thomas deserved. Martin smiled slightly. That's where it gets interesting. I have connections at the University of Virginia's Early American History Department. The department chair, Dr. Abigail Washington, was my doctoral advisor and is widely respected across the political spectrum for her balanced approach to constitutional history. With your permission, I could approach her confidentially about forming a small authentication team. The offer seemed both fortuitous and slightly concerning. Was it mere coincidence that Martin had connections to exactly the kind of expert they needed, or was the universe conspiring to bring Thomas's discovery to light? What would Dr. Washington's involvement mean for us? Eleanor asked. For recognition of Thomas's work and for our financial situation? She felt uncomfortable raising the monetary aspect, but couldn't ignore their practical needs. Academic ethics would require full acknowledgement of Thomas's research contribution, Martin assured her. As for financial considerations, while the for documents themselves would ideally enter the public trust, there are often grants and fellowships associated with major historical discoveries. Additionally, book rights, speaking engagements, and consulting opportunities frequently follow such findings. This new information added another dimension to Eleanor's calculations. A partnership with respected academics might provide not just validation of Thomas's work, but sustainable financial opportunities that aligned with their values, opportunities that honored the historical significance of the discovery rather than treating it as a commodity. "I'd like to sleep on this before making any decisions," Eleanor said finally. "This isn't just about me, it's about my son's future and my husband's legacy." "Of course," Martin agreed, carefully returning the documents to their protective sleeves. "These materials have waited more than 2 centuries. Another day or two won't matter." As Martin packed his equipment, he paused, seeming to debate whether to share something more. "There's one other thing you should know," he said finally. "You and I aren't the only ones interested in Revolutionary-era documents from this region. There's a private collection company, Heritage Acquisitions, that has been quietly approaching historical societies and family estates throughout Virginia seeking founding-era materials." "How do you know this?" Eleanor asked. "They approached the Oak Ridge Historical Society last month, asking specifically about family papers from the constitutional period. They were particularly interested in any connections to delegates who stayed in private residences during the convention." This new information added urgency to Eleanor's decision. If others were already hunting for materials similar to what they had discovered, the window for establishing their historical connection and proper academic context might be narrowing. That evening, as Eleanor prepared dinner in their increasingly comfortable workshop apartment, she found herself at a crossroads that seemed to mirror the nation's own founding moment, a decision point where pragmatic concerns, ethical principles, and long-term vision all needed careful balancing. As she watched Alex completing his homework at the kitchen table, his medication lined up neatly beside his water glass, she thought about the future they were building. The workshop renovation was progressing well. His health was stable in there. New environment, and for the first time in years, they had the breathing room to think beyond immediate survival. The discovery in the floorboards offered multiple paths forward. They could partner with academics like Martin and Dr. Washington, ensuring the documents received proper historical context while securing academic recognition for Thomas's work. They could approach a major institution directly, potentially receiving a finder's fee that would solve their financial challenges immediately. Or they could explore private collectors who might pay substantially more, but would remove the documents from public access. Each path had different implications for their financial security, for Thomas's legacy, for Alex's future, and for the historical record itself. As she considered these options, Eleanor found herself returning to the conversation she'd had with Alex about the purpose of historical research, truth and understanding above recognition or reward. That night, after Alex had gone to bed, Eleanor opened Thomas's research journal again, seeking guidance from the man whose work had led them to this moment. In his final entries, she found a passage that seemed to speak directly to her dilemma. "History belongs to all of us, yet we encounter it through individual lenses. The greatest service I could render these documents, if they prove to be what I believe, is not to claim them as my discovery, but to ensure they enter the public consciousness with appropriate context and respect for their complexity. The story they tell is not simple, not aligned with any current political agenda, but profoundly human in its mess and marvel. That humanity is what must be preserved above all." In those words, Eleanor found her answer. The path forward would require balancing practical needs with ethical principles, immediate gains with long-term impact. It wouldn't be the easiest route, but it would honor both the historical significance of the discovery and the values that had driven Thomas's research values. She was surprised to find she shared more deeply than she had realized. The next morning, Eleanor called Martin and asked him to arrange a confidential meeting with Dr. Washington. "I want to proceed with authentication and proper academic context," she explained. "But I need to understand exactly what that process would look like before committing the documents to institutional control." Within 3 days, Dr. Abigail Washington arrived at the workshop. a distinguished historian in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and penetrating dark eyes behind stylish glasses. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to navigating both academic politics and public historical discourse. After examining the documents with Martin's portable equipment and reviewing Thomas's research methodology, Dr. Washington sat across from Eleanor at the kitchen table, her expression one of controlled excitement. "These appear to be genuine, Mrs. Mitchell, pending more comprehensive testing. I believe your husband discovered something extraordinary, a contemporaneous account that complements and sometimes challenges Madison's official record of the Constitutional Convention." Eleanor felt a surge of vindication on Thomas's behalf. What would proper handling of these materials involve? Dr. Washington outlined a methodical approach. First, comprehensive scientific authentication at the university's conservation laboratory. Second, assembly of a small interdisciplinary team for scholarly assessment. Third, preparation of an initial academic paper introducing the documents to the scholarly community. Fourth, development of a public exhibition in partnership with a major institution like the Smithsonian. Throughout this process, your husband's research would be fully credited, and you would retain certain rights as the discoverer, Dr. Washington explained. The university could offer a research fellowship position to support your involvement in the project. And the documents themselves? Eleanor asked. Ideally, they would eventually be housed in a major public institution, where they could be properly preserved and made accessible to researchers, Dr. Washington replied. But that could be structured as a conditional donation or long-term loan, rather than an outright transfer of ownership. This approach addressed many of Eleanor's concerns: academic validation, recognition of Thomas's work, some financial support, and most importantly, ensuring the documents entered the public discourse with proper context. But before she could respond, Dr. Washington added something unexpected. There's another aspect to consider. If authenticated, these documents won't just add historical detail, they'll potentially transform our understanding of certain constitutional provisions. Hampton appears to have recorded private discussions about executive power limitations, judicial review, and federal-state relations that didn't make it into the official record. Eleanor understood the implication immediately. Political implications. Inevitably, Dr. Washington nodded. Some will embrace these new insights. Others will resist them. What's crucial is that their introduction to public discourse be scholarly and measured rather than sensationalized. As they discussed logistics for the authentication process, a car pulled into the driveway, an expensive black SUV with tinted windows that immediately seemed out of place in rural Oak Ridge. "Are you expecting someone?" Dr. Washington asked. Before Eleanor could answer, the vehicle's door opened and a woman emerged, tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. "That's Victoria Hayes," Martin said, moving to the window. "Director of Acquisitions for Heritage, the company I mentioned that's been approaching historical societies." Eleanor felt a chill. How had Heritage learned about their property or their discovery? She opened the door before Hayes could knock, determined to control this unexpected encounter. "Ms. Hayes, is it? How can I help you?" Hayes offered a practiced smile and an expensive business card. "Mrs. Mitchell, I apologize for arriving unannounced. I'm Victoria Hayes from Heritage Acquisitions. We specialize in preserving historical documents by connecting them with private collectors who have the resources to care for them properly." "And what brings you to my property?" Eleanor kept her tone neutral, giving nothing away. "Heritage has been researching the Hampton family connections to the Constitutional Convention," Hayes explained smoothly. "When we learned that Thomas Mitchell had been conducting similar research before his passing, and that you had recently taken possession of his property, it seemed a natural courtesy to discuss potential collaboration." The explanation was plausible but concerning. It suggested Heritage had been monitoring property records and research trends, perhaps piecing together the same historical connections Thomas had followed. "This isn't a good time for discussions," Eleanor replied. "I have guests, as you can see." Hayes's gaze shifted to Dr. Washington, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Dr. Washington, what a surprise. The academic interest in this property suggests Mrs. Mitchell may have found something significant." Dr. Washington's response was diplomatic but firm. "Victoria, Heritage's interest in constitutional-era documents continues, I see. Mrs. Mitchell has kindly allowed me to view her late husband's research materials, which show promising scholarly methodology." The professional tension between the two women was palpable. Eleanor sensed long-standing differences in approach to historical materials, the public, academic tradition versus private acquisition. "Perhaps we could schedule a meeting later this week," Hayes suggested, turning back to Eleanor. "Heritage would be interested in discussing any historical materials you may have discovered. Our private clients offer very competitive compensation, without the bureaucratic complications of institutional donation." The implied financial incentive was clear, as was the suggestion that private acquisition would be simpler than academic partnership. Before Eleanor could respond, Dr. Washington spoke again. "Mrs. Mitchell is considering all appropriate options for any significant historical materials, including proper authentication and scholarly context before any decisions about disposition." Hayes's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Of course, proper process is essential. Heritage simply offers an alternative that many families find more personally beneficial." She handed Eleanor a folder. "Our standard terms. For your consideration, my direct number is included. I hope we can speak soon." As the sleek vehicle departed down the gravel drive, Eleanor, Martin, and Dr. Washington exchanged concerned glances. "Heritage doesn't make house calls to rural Virginia without solid intelligence," Dr. Washington said quietly. "Someone has connected the dots about your husband's research in this property." "They're aggressive but legitimate," Martin added. "They represent collectors who pay extraordinary amounts for founding-era documents, far more than any public institution could offer." Eleanor opened the folder Hayes had left. Inside was a preliminary offer sheet with a staggering figure $2.5 million for unspecified historical documents relating to the Constitutional Convention, with provisions for higher amounts depending on specifics. The number took her breath away. It represented immediate financial security, Alex's college education, healthcare needs fully covered, and freedom from economic worry for years to come. It was a direct solution to the practical challenges that had driven their move to the workshop. In the first place, this is substantially more than any public institution could provide, Dr. Washington acknowledged, reading the offer. But it comes with significant trade-offs. Private acquisition typically means limited or no public access to the documents. The historical context and scholarly interpretation would be controlled by the buyer, not by academic consensus. Eleanor considered the competing offers now before her: academic partnership with proper historical context but modest financial support, versus private acquisition with extraordinary financial compensation but potential loss of public access and scholarly interpretation. "I need to think about this," she said finally, "and discuss it with Alex. This affects his future as much as anyone's." They agreed to proceed with initial authentication at the university laboratory while Eleanor considered her options. Dr. Washington would prepare transportation of the documents with proper security and environmental controls, and Eleanor would receive a detailed plan for the proposed academic partnership within 2 days. That evening, after Dr. Washington and Martin had departed with carefully selected sample documents for preliminary testing, Eleanor sat with Alex on the small porch they had added to the workshop during their renovations. The autumn air was crisp, stars emerging in the darkening sky above the surrounding oak trees. There are two paths forward with Dad's discovery, Eleanor explained, simplifying the complex situation for her son. We can work with the university to share the documents with museums and researchers, helping people understand more about how our country was created. Or we can sell them to private collectors for a lot of money, enough to make all our financial problems disappear. Alex considered this with the thoughtfulness that continued to surprise her. What would Dad want? The question pierced straight to the heart of Eleanor's dilemma. 5 years ago, she would have answered without hesitation that Thomas would choose academic recognition and historical truth over financial gain. But now, having read his research journals and understood his growing concern about how the documents would be interpreted in today's polarized environment, she wasn't so certain. I think he would want these documents to help people understand American history better, she said carefully. But he was also becoming concerned about how they might be used if not presented properly. And what do you want, Mom? Alex asked, watching her face closely. Eleanor hadn't expected the question. Throughout their challenges since Thomas's death, she had focused so entirely on Alex's needs that her own desires had become almost irrelevant. I want security for us, she began, then paused, realizing there was more to it than that. But I also want to honor the historical significance of what your dad discovered. And honestly, I've come to respect his work in a way I didn't when he was alive. Alex nodded, seeming to understand something Eleanor had only just recognized. Herself, you and Dad disagreed about his research, didn't you? That's why we never came here when he was working. We did, Eleanor admitted. I thought he was wasting time on historical theories instead of focusing on practical concerns. I didn't understand why it mattered so much to him. And now you do, Alex said simply, not a question but a statement. Now I do, Eleanor agreed, surprised by the emotion that rose in her throat. These documents show that the people who created our country were real humans making compromises, having arguments, sometimes acting out of self-interest. Understanding that makes our system of government more impressive, not less. Your dad wanted people to see that complexity. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the evening settle around their new home. Finally, Alex spoke again. I think we should do what helps the most people understand history better, even if it means we don't get as much money. The simple wisdom of her son's perspective crystallized something in Eleanor's thinking. The documents had been preserved for over 2 centuries, not for personal gain, but for historical truth. The Hampton Journal explicitly stated the intention that they remain private until such time as the nation is established enough to face its full history. Thomas had dedicated years to uncovering that history, not for profit but for understanding. To honor both his work and the original purpose of the documents, the path forward became clearer. The next morning, Eleanor called Dr. Washington to discuss specifics of the academic partnership, and then contacted Victoria Hayes to politely decline Heritage's offer. Hayes's response was predictably corporate, expressing disappointment while maintaining professional courtesy, but her final comment revealed more genuine emotion. You're making a choice with significant financial implications, Mrs. Mitchell. The academic path rarely rewards discoverers appropriately, but I respect your decision and wish you luck with your chosen partners. The following week brought the formal signing of their partnership agreement with the University of Virginia's Early American History Department. The terms reflected Eleanor's priorities: scientific authentication of the documents, development of proper historical context, academic recognition of Thomas's research contribution, a 2-year research fellowship position for Eleanor that included health benefits covering Alex's medical needs, and joint decision-making authority over how the documents would be presented to the public. Most importantly, the agreement specified that while the documents would eventually be housed at a major public institution, they would be presented as the Thomas Mitchell collection of Hampton papers, ensuring his contribution would be permanently recognized. The financial compensation, while far less than Heritage's offer, included the fellowship stipend, publication rights for a book about the discovery, and potential speaking engagements, enough to provide sustainable support while they established their new life in Oak Ridge. 6 months later, on a crisp spring morning, Eleanor stood with Alex, Dr. Washington, Martin, and a small group of academic and institutional representatives at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. The comprehensive authentication process had confirmed what they had initially believed. The documents were genuine, 18th century materials that offered new insights into the Constitutional Convention. The public exhibition was being unveiled that day, presenting selected documents alongside explanatory panels that provided historical context and acknowledged the complex nature of the nation's founding. A special section honored Thomas's research, methodology, and the journey that had led to the discovery. As Alex helped Dr. Washington unveil the central display case containing Hampton's journal, Eleanor felt the convergence of past and present, of Thomas's persistence and her own pragmatism, of historical legacy and contemporary opportunity. The exhibition plaque captured this beautifully. The Hampton Papers, 1787 to 1789, discovered by Thomas Mitchell, presented by Eleanor and Alexander Mitchell. These documents remind us that the Constitution was created not by demigods, but by brilliant, flawed humans navigating unprecedented challenges. Their achievement lies not in their perfection, but in their creation of a system designed to accommodate human imperfection through compromise, checks and balances, and the possibility of ongoing improvement. The gathered historians and institution representatives applauded as the display was officially opened. But for Eleanor, the most meaningful moment came when Alex looked up at her with eyes bright with understanding beyond his years. "We did it, Mom," he said simply. "We finished Dad's quest." "We did," Eleanor agreed, her arm around her son's shoulders. "But we also started something new, something that will continue long after us." It was the perfect distillation of what their journey had become, not merely the completion of Thomas's unfinished research or the solution to their financial struggles, but the beginning of a new chapter that honored the past while creating possibilities for the future. When Eleanor Mitchell first stood at her husband's abandoned workshop with barely $3,400 to her name, she could never have imagined how completely her life would transform. What began as a desperate gamble to avoid financial ruin became a journey of rediscovery, not just of historically significant documents, but of family connections, community support, and personal strength. The Hampton Papers had indeed proven to contain historical treasure, but the true wealth Eleanor discovered went beyond 18th century documents and academic recognition. She found healing for old wounds with Thomas's memory, understanding his passion in ways she never had before. She witnessed her son Alex flourish in their new rural home, his health stabilizing and his confidence growing as he embraced their family's remarkable legacy. Most importantly, Eleanor discovered her own capacity to navigate complex challenges with integrity and wisdom. In choosing a path that balanced scholarly responsibility with practical needs, historical preservation with contemporary relevance, she created a legacy that would benefit not just her family, but an entire nation's understanding of its founding principles. The old workshop that had once seemed like a last resort had become a true home, just as Thomas's obsession that she had once dismissed had become a meaningful mission they completed together across the boundaries of life and death. In renovating her husband's workshop, Eleanor had renovated not just a building, but her understanding of family, of purpose, and of what constitutes true wealth in a life well lived. As she watched Alex proudly explaining the historical significance of the Hampton Journal to visitors at the exhibition opening, Eleanor recognized the perfect symmetry of their journey. They had begun with nothing but a key to an old workshop and a hidden journal. Now they held the keys to a future filled with purpose, connection, and the knowledge that they had helped Americans better understand the human story behind their nation's founding. The documents themselves were invaluable historical artifacts, but the most precious discovery had been the recognition that history isn't just about preserving the past. It's about understanding how that past continues to shape our present and future. By bringing the Hampton papers into the public trust with proper context and care, the Mitchell family had honored both Thomas's work and William Hampton's original intention that future generations might someday be ready to embrace the full, complex humanity of the nation's founding. In doing so, they had transformed a personal tragedy into a public treasure, financial desperation into sustainable security, and an abandoned workshop into both a home and a launching point for a historical journey that would continue to unfold for generations to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from our channel.